So the last item on the agenda today is an information item on Canada's participation at the 7th review meeting of the Convention on Nuclear Safety. This is outlined in CMD 17M51, and there are representatives from industry with us here today in attendance and by teleconference. And Mr. Lee from Candu Energy is joining us. Mr. Lee, can you hear us?
Dr. Binder, it's Albert Lee from Candu Energy. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, welcome. And we have also Brian Iea from Earth Canada. And we also have the president of the convention who's sitting there at the corner. How come you're not joining us kind of in the front for at least for color commentary when we talk about the Canadian delegation? Okay, so I understand, Mr. Frappier, you'll make the presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. President and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Jerry Frappier, and I'm the Director General of the Directorate of Power Reactor Regulation. Today, I have the pleasure to present for information the results of Canada's participation in the 7th review meeting of the Convention on Nuclear Safety, and we'll explain a little bit about what the Convention on Nuclear Safety is with our presentation. As you mentioned, with me are both Cnsc staff members and industry and other government department members who were part of the delegation to the 7th review. And as you also noted, Mr. Ramsey Jamel is here, and he was the president of the entire 7th review meeting, and we'll explain that in a minute or two as well. I guess our slides are not, yeah. There we go. Following an introduction that includes important background information on the Convention on Nuclear Safety itself, today's presentation will provide some details on the review process leading up to and including the 7th review meeting. We will also focus on the specific review results for Canada, including findings on which Canada will follow up at the next 8th review meeting. And I will then finish with some concluding remarks. But first, I'll begin with a brief description of the CNS, its obligations, processors, and structures. The CNS was drawn up in the aftermath of the nuclear accident at Chernobyl in 1986. It is an international agreement that came into force 10 years later to attain 3 main objectives: to achieve a high level of nuclear safety worldwide, to ensure effective defense against potential radiological hazards at nuclear power plants, to prevent accidents and mitigate radiological consequences should they occur. Nuclear safety, for the purpose of this obligation of the CNS, is in the context of nuclear power plants. The Convention on Nuclear Safety is described as an incentive instrument which seeks to promote nuclear safety, primarily through a peer review process. As a contracting party, Canada, along with other contracting parties, has the responsibility to provide sufficient information to facilitate its review and to participate in the review of other contracting parties. There are no specific enforcement mechanisms within the CNS. Rather, the emphasis is on identifying areas where nuclear safety can be improved, and 2, learning from measures that contracting parties have already taken or are taking to improve safety. The responsibilities of the contracting parties are described in the articles of the Convention. There are articles that describe the general obligations of the contracting parties in the peer review process. There are also specific articles that identify the required content of the national reports. Those are listed in subsequent slides. In terms of the general obligations, all contracting parties are required to participate in the ongoing peer review cycle, which is organized every 3 years. Contracting parties submit national reports that address the specific obligations of the Convention roughly 7 months before the review meeting. They then review the reports of other contracting parties, pose written questions to other contractor parties, based on their review and response to written questions that they have received. Finally, contracting parties attend the review meeting itself, where there are summary presentations that include updates, followed by additional discussions and recording of the main conclusions of the peer review for each contracting party. A typical national report for the CNS is organized according to Articles 6 through 19, which cover the specific obligations of each contracting party. These articles are aligned with the safety framework of the Iea Safety Standards and start with the overall legislative framework, the recognition that operators have the primary responsibility for safety, and that regulatory bodies have the role of ensuring that operators uphold that responsibility. They also cover specific technical areas and the life cycle phases of siting, design, construction, and operation of nuclear power plants. These obligations are fulfilled by the contracting parties as a whole, for instance at the level of the federal government, but also by the relevant regulatory bodies, the designers and operators of nuclear power plants, and other important stakeholders. Although the CNS articles are relatively comprehensive, there are certain areas relevant to nuclear power plants that are out of scope of the CNS. For example, the articles do not address nuclear security, safeguards, non-proliferation, decommissioning, or packaging and transport. The topics of waste management is covered under Article 19, but only insofar as it pertains to day-to-day operations of a nuclear power plant. Other aspects of waste management are more comprehensively addressed in the Complementary Convention, which is the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management and on the Safety of Radioactive Waste Management. A note about Article 6, strictly speaking, it only applies once as a requirement to justify the safety of continued operation of nuclear power plants that already exist at the time of the ratifying the convention. However, contracting parties have decided to use this article as a vehicle to report at each review meeting on the ongoing safety of existing nuclear power plants. I would also like to note that many of these articles are not directly applicable to all contracting parties, since some do not have operating nuclear power plants. Some contracting parties without nuclear power plants opt voluntarily to report under these articles on measures they have taken with respect to other types of nuclear facilities, such as research reactors, even though strictly speaking research reactors are outside of the convention. For the 7th review meeting, the contracting parties were organized into 7 country groups. The conclusions of the peer review of each national report were determined by consensus of the other contracting parties within the respective country group. The country group members drafted a country review report for each of the contracting parties and finalized it at the 7th review meeting. These documents, which were used for the first time at the 7th review meeting, were considerably larger than the records of the peer review generated at previous review meetings, and the content was reviewed much more systematically. The country review reports highlighted main findings in the categories of challengers, suggestions, good practices, and areas of good performance. We will define these categories later in the context of the peer review results for Canada. I will now turn the presentation over to Mr. Gracie, who will provide details on the specific outcomes of the 7th review meeting.
Good afternoon, Mr. President and members of the Commission. My name is Brian Gracie, and I'm a Senior Regulatory Program Officer in the Directorate of Power Reactor Regulation. I will provide some of the details and results related to the latest CNS review. I'll begin with a description of the review process leading up to and including the 7th review meeting. The 7th review meeting was run by 31 CNS officers who have responsibilities to organize and execute the review. There are 3 officers with general responsibilities. The review meeting president is supported by 2 vice presidents. The other officers facilitate the individual peer reviews of contracting parties at the country group level. Out of the 31 CNS officers, Canada held 2 officer positions at the 7th review meeting. This was comparable to previous review meetings, but this time Canada had the honor to fill the lead role, with Mr. Ramsey Jamal of the Cnsc serving as president of the 7th review meeting. Mr. Jamal and his team drove much of the improvement in participation and openness and transparency observed at the 7th review meeting. These successes were the result of significant effort from Cnsc, Global Affairs Canada, and others. In addition to initiatives that will be described in subsequent slides, the President and his team arranged webcasting of the opening plenary, segments of the closing plenary, and the press conference. They also invited signatories to the convention that had not yet ratified it to attend the opening plenary and segments of the closing plenary. In addition to Mr. Jamal, Mr. John Froats, a professor at University of Ontario Institute of Technology with considerable CNS experience, served as the rapporteur in Country Group Number 2. A critical part of his role as rapporteur was the drafting of 12 country review reports for his country group, which involved considerably more effort than previous meetings. Mr. Jamal and Mr. Froats will continue in their roles as officers until the organizational meeting for the next review cycle, which is scheduled for next fall. At the time of the 7th review meeting, in March of this year, there were 80 contracting parties, which included 79 countries and 1 organization, Euratom. Regional organizations such as Euratom, of an integration or other nature, which consisting of sovereign states, are also permitted to become contracting parties. At the time of the 7th review meeting, there were 10 IEA member states that had signed but not yet ratified the convention. The number of contracting parties has increased since the 7th review meeting. The convention took effect for Madagascar just after the meeting. Cuba and Syria also ratified the convention in 2017, thanks in part to the efforts of the President of the 7th Review and his team. At present, 8 IEA member states have signed but not ratified the CNS. I will now describe the general state of participation in the CNS review process. Fulfillment of these CNS obligations is facilitated by a network of national points of contact who are in regular communication with the CNS Secretariat, which is provided by the IEA. This was the first time that all contracting parties have named a national point of contact. The President and his team also had a positive impact on specific aspects of the review cycle for the 7th review meeting. Through lobbying and promotion, they helped ensure that nearly all the contracting parties submitted national reports for the review meeting, the best result for any review meeting to date. Contracting parties also responded to the President's call for openness and transparency related to the national reports. 21 contracting parties proactively posted their reports on the IEA public website by the time of the 7th review meeting, Canada included. Other reports were posted by the CNS Secretariat on the IEA's public website 90 days after the closure of the 7th review meeting. So participation was better for the 7th review meeting, but there's always room for improvement. As a footnote, it should be stated that the types of shortcomings being described in this slide and the next couple of slides, either with respect to CNS obligations or expectations, generally pertain to contracting parties that do not have nuclear power plants. Participation in other aspects of the CNS review process, including enhancement of openness and transparency, was also improved for the 7th review meeting as compared to previous reviews. Reviewing the national reports of other contracting parties is a significant task, and the benefit of such effort is not always immediate or obvious. Nevertheless, a record number of contracting parties did post written questions to other contracting parties as part of the 7th review. The President of the 7th review meeting encouraged all contracting parties to post their answers to the questions that were posed to them. Although this level of openness was not the norm of previous review meetings, 4 contracting parties proactively posted their responses to questions on the IEA public website by the time of the 7th review meeting, Canada included. Currently, 8 contracting parties have posted their answers to written questions on the IEA website, and others have posted them on their own national websites. By various measures, the 7th review meeting itself was a success. Over 900 delegates attended, and the attendance rate for contracting parties was the highest for any review meeting. However, of the 77 contracting parties that registered for the 7th review meeting, 3 of them were not present for their own national presentation. CNS review meetings typically have a few no-shows. Nevertheless, the peer review in general was challenging, and active exploration and debate was witnessed in many review sessions. At the 7th review meeting, contracting parties in each country group recorded peer review results and country review reports for each contracting party in the group, even if it did not attend the meeting. The president of the 7th review meeting encouraged all contracting parties to post their country review reports, which has been done by Canada and some other contracting parties. As a concluding comment on the general results of the review cycle, I would say that the enhancements of the documentation of review results and of openness and transparency were significant accomplishments. Replication of these positive results at the next review meeting will again require significant commitment on the part of the next set of officers and the contracting parties. The last slide in this part of the presentation shows how the 80 contracting parties were divided into the 7 country groups. The number in parentheses is the number of operating nuclear power plants in the country. Less than half of the contracting parties had operating nuclear power plants at the time the list was compiled. In the context of the overall review process, I'd now like to describe the specific results of the review for Canada at the 7th review meeting. Contracting parties are guided to include various stakeholders in the CNS peer review. Canada is a leader in this regard. Although the CNSC plays the lead role in coordinating the project, critical contributions continue to come from numerous organizations. The ones listed here contributed to deliverables such as Canada's report, the responses to questions, the questions to other contracting parties, the presentation, the discussions at the review meeting, and the various organizational communications activities associated with all those outputs. This slide shows the entire Canadian delegation for the review meeting itself. The head of delegation was Mr. Jerry Frappier. In addition to the personnel who supported Mr. Jamal as president, the delegation included other CNSC staff members and representatives from industry and Health Canada. The Canadian delegates represented Canada while bringing their specific expertise from the roles in licensee and government organizations. They helped explain Canada's fulfillment of the Cns obligations and how it progressed since the last review meeting. They also attended the presentations of other contracting parties and followed up in those discussions, while championing the principles of openness and transparency. In terms of Canada's role as a leader of the can-do community, Canadian delegates influenced proceedings in a manner to optimize the value of the review process for can-do countries. For example, they provided detailed information to can-do countries that faced specific questions related to can-do technology. They also reviewed the outputs of the review meeting to ensure that they were easily interpreted in the context of can-do technology, operation, and regulation. Mr. Froats, Mr. Jamal, and his support staff worked to make sure the review ran smoothly. Delegates also attended various plenary sessions, side meetings, and the meetings of the open-ended working group to discuss proposals to improve the CNS. I'll now turn to some of the actual results of the peer review. Written comments that were submitted to Canada, as well as informal comments received at the review meeting, indicated that other contracting parties regarded Canada's report as one of high quality. It was one of the first to be posted for the public to read. Canada continued to be a leader in the review process, posting 385 questions and comments on the reports of 29 other contracting parties. These questions and comments were directed to the 11 other contracting parties in Country Group 3, which was our country group, as well as other contracting parties which Canada traditionally has an interest, including CANDU and G7 countries. Canada received a total of 164 written questions and comments on its report from 20 contracting parties, distributed across the articles of the Convention as shown on the slide. I can illustrate the nature of the questions with a few examples. Some of the questions on Article 7, the regulatory framework, requested clarification of the role and content of the License Conditions Handbook. Some of the questions on Article 8 requested information on self-assessment and audit at the CNSC. I will now focus on highlights of the review of Canada at the review meeting. This slide shows the 6 challenges for Canada that were identified back at the 6th review meeting 3 years ago. Per CNS guidance, Canada provided specific information in its report and its presentation to show how it had addressed these challenges. Based on the review of the information, 4 challenges were concluded to be closed and 2 were concluded to remain open. The first challenge listed was the completion of the Cnsc Integrated Action Plan in response to the Fukushima Daiichi accident. Canada demonstrated how the Fukushima action items that were open at the time of the 6th review meeting had been closed, with some follow-up being conducted in the context of station-specific action items. On that basis, the peer reviewers in Country Group 3 concluded that this challenge was closed. Second, there was a challenge to enhance probabilistic safety assessments by considering multi-units and irradiated fuel bays. Based on the publication of updated regulatory requirements and the licensee's work to address them, this challenge was also declared as closed. Third was a challenge to establish guidelines for the return of evacuees following a nuclear accident and to confirm the acceptability to the Canadian public. This challenge remains open. It will be carried forward to the 8th review meeting, and follow-up is discussed in a subsequent slide. Fourth was a challenge to invite an emergency preparedness review mission, which is a review service offered by the Iea. Health Canada and stakeholders have completed emergency exercises to validate the Federal Nuclear Emergency Plan and have implemented lessons learned. Health Canada and CNSC staff have also participated in such missions in other countries to observe best practices. Prior to the 7th review meeting, Canada wrote to the Iea requesting such a mission with a target date in 2019. The 5th challenge from the 6th review meeting was to update emergency operational, interventional guidelines, and protective measures for the public during and following radiological events. This challenge also remains open. Follow-up is discussed in a subsequent slide. Finally, there was a challenge to formalize the approach to the transition to the decommissioning phase of a nuclear power plant, which was identified in the context of Gentilly 2. This challenge was closed based on the work at Gentilly 2 to transition to a safe storage state, the development of CNSC's licensing strategy, which led to the replacement of Gentilly 2's license to operate with a license to decommission, and the adaptation of CNSC's compliance program to suit the decommissioning activities. At the 7th review meeting, the peer reviewers in Country Group 3 identified 3 new challenges for Canada and 1 suggestion. They are related to amendments to the regulations, CNSC Reg Docs, end of operation of multi-unit MPPs, and can-do safety issues. In the context of CNS review results, a challenge is defined as the difficult issue for the contracting party, beyond day-to-day activities, and/or a weakness that needs to be addressed. A suggestion, on the other hand, is considered an action needed to improve the implementation of the obligations of the Convention. To summarize, this slide shows all findings that will be carried forward to the 8th review meeting, the 2 open findings from the 6th review meeting, and the 4 new findings from the 7th review meeting. We've numbered them for ease of reference, with C indicating a challenge and S a suggestion. The next 6 slides provide an update on progress towards resolution of each of these findings. To begin, challenge C1 for Canada, carried over from the 6th review meeting, is to establish guidelines for the return of evacuees following an accident and to confirm their acceptability to the Canadian public. To address this, CNSC has benchmarked recovery measures and collaborated with Health Canada on a discussion paper on the proposed framework for recovery. Following a consultation with provincial and federal partners, the discussion paper on the framework for recovery in the event of a nuclear or radiological emergency was issued for public consultation until January 27, 2018. The plan is to publish the framework, which includes guidelines for evacuees, in the next CNS reporting period so that it can be reported as complete in Canada's report for the 8th review meeting. The other challenge that was carried over from the 6th review meeting is to update operational interventional guidelines for emergencies and protective measures for the public during and following major radiological events. To address this, Health Canada completed the consultation and updated the Canadian guidelines for protective actions during a nuclear emergency to address comments received during this and previous public consultation. The guidelines address protective measures and operational interventional guidelines for the public, which include evacuation, sheltering, iodine thyroid blocking, and water and food consumption. Health Canada has approved the revised guidelines and plans to publish them by the end of this year. It is expected that the revised guidelines will be fully incorporated into revised provincial nuclear plans, thereby serving as a basis for harmonization. Challenge C3 for Canada, introduced at the 7th review meeting, is for the CNSC to publish the drafted amendments to the Class 1 nuclear facility regulations and the radiation protection regulations that address lessons learned from the Fukushima Daiichi accident. These amendments were published in the Canada Gazette 2 on October 4th, 2017. Canada will report in its next national report that this challenge has been addressed. Challenge C4 is for the CNSC to complete its transition to the improved regulatory framework, that is, the RegDoc series. CNSC continues to modernize its regulatory framework based on a prioritization of various projects. Completion of the work by fiscal year 2019-2020 will allow Canada to report at the 8th review meeting that this challenge has been addressed. This will be accompanied by information on the implementation of the new and revised regulatory documents that are applicable to nuclear power plants. Challenge C5 is for Canada to formalize the planned approach to the end of operation of multi-unit nuclear power plants. I've already described how CNSC has developed a regulatory process for transition of a nuclear power plant from the operational phase to the decommissioning phase. This process will be updated as the decommissioning of Gentil 2 continues and as the ends of life of existing multi-unit nuclear power plants approach. The CNSC report for the 8th review meeting will include details on steps being taken at Pickering as its units proceed toward end of operations. The framework for this transition will also be updated when CNSC replaces its existing guide on decommissioning planning for licensed activities with the new RegDoc 2.11.2. Suggestion S1, identified at the 7th review meeting, is for Canada to address the remaining Category 3 CANDU safety issues. 3 of these issues are related to large break loss of coolant accidents. Specifically, the issues being addressed are the analysis for void reactivity coefficient, fuel behavior in high temperature transients, and fuel behavior in power pulse transients. The other Category 3 CANDU safety issue deals with the systematic assessment of the effects of high energy line breaks. The resolution of these issues was already described for the Commission in 2 previous CMDs. CNSC and industry stakeholders expect that the work to satisfactorily address these remaining issues will be completed during the next CNS reporting period, which will allow Canada to state in this report for the 8th review meeting that this suggestion has been addressed. Besides challenges and suggestions, the peer reviews also identified positive findings for Canada, which are described in the next 2 slides. A good practice in the context of the CNS is a new or revised practice, policy, or program that makes a significant contribution to nuclear safety. A good practice is one that has been tried and proven by at least one contracting party, but has not been widely implemented by other contracting parties and is applicable to other contracting parties with similar programs. At the 7th review meeting, peer reviewers applied the criteria for good practices more consistently and strictly than had been done in previous review meetings. Canada received one of only 4 good practices that were awarded at the 7th review meeting for CNSC's participant funding program, which was recognized as fostering openness and transparency, and increasing safety for providing additional information to the Commission. Hungary was awarded the good practice for its extensive outreach to the public and neighboring countries, conduct of public hearings for licensing, and educational conferences that went well beyond that generally undertaken by other contracting parties. Euratom was awarded the other two good practices. One was for proactively organizing a topical peer review related to the Nuclear Safety Directive before its actual transposition by European Union member states. The other was for the implementation of the Instrument for Nuclear Safety Cooperation Program for assisting countries outside the European Union. An area of good performance in the context of the CNS is a commendable practice, policy, or program that has been implemented effectively. It is a significant accomplishment for the contracting party, but does not have to be unique among contracting parties. Canada received 8 areas of good performance, the most of any contracting party, at the 7th review meeting. They're listed on this slide. And you can see that they span a variety of topics. Some are accomplishments for the CNSC, whereas others are accomplishments for the industry. Regarding the last bullet, it is noteworthy that Romania also got an area of good performance for its use of the Can-Do Owners Group weekly screening OPEX process, an example of how Canadian industry is positively influencing nuclear safety worldwide. Canada was active in the open-ended working group, where 4 proposals to improve the CNS were discussed. Canada put forward 2 of the proposals and was a major contributor to another proposal, which was jointly submitted by 12 contracting parties. There was no consensus on Canada's first proposal to post videos of national presentations after they are delivered. Although the idea was to post only a video of the presentation itself and not the debate or conclusions within the country group that follows that, contracting parties had concerns about maintaining the confidentiality of the review, which is an obligation of the Convention. Contracting parties were also worried about public perception in the inevitable circumstance where some presentations would be better prepared, delivered, or filmed than others. A decision on the second proposal from Canada was deferred to the CNS officers' turnover meeting in March of 2019. It involved the continuation of an earlier improvement initiative to develop a template for writing the text for specific articles in the national reports. The German proposal, although approved, was greatly scaled down and will not have a significant impact on the CNS review process. Certain parts of the joint proposal were approved by contracting parties. For example, it was agreed to conduct a survey at each review meeting to evaluate the effectiveness of recent process improvements, changes to CNS guidance, etc. As another example, contracting parties also agreed to hold CNS education workshops to highlight awareness of the obstacles and challenges to participation for countries without nuclear programs. Other parts of the proposal that were accepted will enhance the review meetings and openness and transparency. CNS review meetings are always an occasion to stage side meetings that are outside the process, such as bilateral and multilateral meetings of contracting parties and technical and other information sessions. At the 7th review meeting, there was a presentation by the delegation from India on the pressure tube releases at Kakrapar, which drew interest from the Can-Do community, the World Association of Nuclear Operators, or WANO, and the Institute of Nuclear Power Operators, or INPO. India described its ongoing investigation and testing related to the events, which occurred in 2015 and 2016. The presentation led to further discussion through bilateral meetings between Canada and India, where Canada pressed for more details related to the event and offered to assist with India's investigation. Another side event was a panel discussion involving the IEA and WANO about the importance of cooperating at these institutional levels to maintain and improve nuclear safety. The sharing of limited resources, elimination of duplicated effort, and increase in efficiency of review services offered were major themes. The two bodies also endorsed the harmonization approaches to ensure strong safety culture among nuclear operators and regulatory bodies, including those in countries developing nuclear power programs and approaching the operational phase.
Thank you, Brian. Mr. Gracie. For the record, it's Jerry Frappy again. I'd like to provide a brief concluding remarks on the results and benefits to Canada related to participation at the 7th review meeting of the Convention on Nuclear Safety. The 7th review meeting continued to demonstrate the value of the CNS peer review process. It was a learning experience where we gained exposure to issues that affect the safety of nuclear power programs and the successful measures that countries are taking to address them. Canada also shared information on areas where we or other countries thought we were doing well. The 7th review meeting was also a challenging experience where Canada and others were questioned at length by peer countries, held accountable for open findings from previous review meetings, and assigned new challenges and suggestions that are expected to be addressed by the 8th review meeting. Canada was a major player at the 7th review meeting. We reviewed many national reports, posed many written questions to those countries, followed up at the review sessions in the country groups, and helped develop the country review reports in our country group. Our own report, presentation, and response to questions demonstrated leadership in nuclear safety, regulatory excellence, openness, and transparency. Our country review report identified some areas where we should continue to work in the next 3 years. And our fulfillment of the role of President resulted in significant improvements in the CNS participation and accountability. Finally, we helped drive some improvements that will take effect for the 8th review meeting, including those that should enhance participation in the review process and openness and transparency. The last slide here is for references, and it provides links to some of Canada's main CNS outputs for the 7th review meeting. And this concludes staff's presentation. We, as well as other members of the Canadian delegation from Industry and Health Canada, are available to respond to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you.